When the desk struck her shoulder, the room gasped, but she didn't flinch. Years of battlefields lived behind her eyes, and in that silence, the bully realized this teacher was not who he thought she was. Hello family, if you're ready for the full story, make sure you hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another story that will blow your mind, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. The morning bell rang with its usual hollow echo, bouncing off the beige walls of Lincoln High School. Students shuffled through the hallways, their laughter and arguments blending into a restless hum. But behind room 214's closed door, Ms. Denise Carter stood in stillness. Her classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and floor wax, a scent oddly comforting to her. She placed a piece of white chalk gently onto the ledge of the blackboard, aligning it with quiet precision. Her movements were deliberate, ritualistic. To her students, she was just another English teacher starting another day. But inside, Denise carried a silence heavier than most people could ever imagine. She traced her fingers over the corner of her desk, worn from years of restless teenagers carving initials. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Denise had been in the military for 12 years before stepping into education. She had walked through deserts that never forgot the taste of blood, sat in bunkers where silence was pierced by gunfire, and buried comrades whose names she still whispered at night. But here, no one knew. She chose not to tell them. She wasn't Ms. Carter, the veteran. She was Ms. Carter, the teacher. That's how she wanted it. A faint knock sounded against the classroom door. Denise turned to see one of her students, Maria, peeking in. "Morning, Miss C," the girl chirped, her smile bright despite the heavy backpack tugging at her shoulders. "Good morning, Maria," Denise replied, her voice steady, calm, always calm. She took comfort in consistency. In this classroom, she wasn't at war. She was safe. Or at least, she believed she was. Across the hall, another student walked with a swagger that wasn't confidence but camouflage. Tyler Johnson, 16, broad-shouldered for his age, a permanent scowl painted across his face. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, drawing annoyed glances from teachers he ignored. Tyler was trouble. That's what they said in the faculty lounge. That's what classmates whispered when he passed. He wore the label like armor, daring anyone to challenge it. What they didn't see was the weight he carried every time he went home. A father locked up 3 states away, a mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't look him in the eye, nights filled with shouting that bled through apartment walls. Anger was his only language. It was safer than vulnerability. As he pushed into his homeroom, students parted, not out of respect but fear. Tyler thrived on it. If they feared him, they couldn't pity him. And pity was worse than hate. He dropped into his seat, tapping his pencil in an impatient rhythm. His gaze drifted out the window, landing briefly on room 214. He didn't know it yet, but that room, and the woman who ran it, would change everything. Denise started her class with quiet authority. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She believed respect wasn't demanded but earned. She called attendance, her tone warm but professional, her gaze sweeping across the faces of teenagers with stories she could only guess at. "Today," she said, writing on the blackboard with crisp strokes, "we're starting to kill a mockingbird." Groans erupted. Denise let them wash over her, unbothered. She knew the value wasn't in the book itself, but in the conversations it could spark, about justice, about empathy, about seeing people for who they really are. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the empty seat in the back corner. Tyler's seat. She had noticed his absences, His scornful smirks when he did attend, the way his eyes never quite met hers. There was something raw in him, something unsettled. She recognized it because she had seen it before, on the faces of young soldiers, boys pretending to be men, men carrying boys' wounds. She exhaled softly. He would be late, again. Meanwhile, Tyler lingered near the vending machine, a half-empty soda in his hand. He wasn't avoiding class, not exactly. He just didn't care. Ms. Carter's class was boring, filled with books that meant nothing to him. But beneath his bravado, there was a different reason. Something about her unsettled him. She wasn't like the other teachers who barked at him or avoided him. She looked at him, really looked, like she saw past the walls he built. And that scared him. Finally, with a sigh, he shoved the soda can into the trash and trudged toward room 214. He pushed the door open mid-lecture, the hinge squealing in protest. The class went quiet for a heartbeat. Denise paused, chalk still in hand. Her eyes met his, steady but not sharp. No judgment, no fear, just recognition. "You're late, Tyler," she said simply. He smirked, throwing himself into the back chair. "Yeah, well, the bell didn't wait for me." A few students snickered. Denise didn't. She turned back to the board, her tone even. Page 3. "We're beginning together." Something in her calmness irritated him. Most teachers scolded, threatened, or sent him out. She didn't. She just carried on. It was like he hadn't disrupted her at all. Like his chaos couldn't touch her order. And that, in some strange way, made him want to push harder. Denise continued, her voice weaving through the passages of Atticus Finch and the courtroom, her words steady as a heartbeat. But inwardly, she felt the tension. Tyler's presence was like static in the air, crackling, unpredictable. She kept her posture composed, her tone unwavering, but her senses were sharp, alert. Old instincts stirred inside her, the kind she had buried beneath lesson plans and chalk dust. Hyper-awareness. The ability to scan a room and note every movement, every potential threat. She hated that part of herself resurfacing here, in a classroom where children should be safe. Still, she carried on. Because that's what she did. Always. The class ended with the scrape of chairs and the chatter of students. Tyler lingered behind, not because he wanted to, but because something held him there. He watched Ms. Carter collect papers, her back straight, her movements deliberate. He caught a glimpse of the faint scar on her forearm when her sleeve slid up. He frowned. She noticed his stare but said nothing. Instead, she stacked the papers neatly, lifted her gaze, and met his eyes. "Tyler," she said softly, but firmly, "you don't have to keep testing how much I can take." He blinked, caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" She gave a small, almost knowing smile. "It means I've been through worse." Before he could respond, another student entered, asking about homework, and the moment dissolved. But for the first time in a long while, Tyler walked out of a classroom unsettled, not because he had rattled the teacher, but because she had rattled him. That night, Denise sat at her kitchen table, papers spread around her, untouched. The city lights flickered faintly outside her window. Her mind wasn't on grading. It was back in the desert, back on nights where silence meant danger, back on faces she couldn't forget. And now, in a classroom of teenagers, one face had brought it all rushing back. Tyler Johnson. She closed her eyes, her jaw tightening. She didn't know it yet, but the path she and that boy were about to walk together would test every scar she carried, and perhaps finally begin to heal them. Have you ever met someone who, without even trying, stirred up memories you thought were long buried? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might help someone else realize they're not alone. And if stories like this remind you of your own journey, don't just scroll past. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of healing and redemption we tell here. The rain had started that morning as a drizzle, tapping lightly on the windows of Lincoln High. By second period, it had turned into a relentless downpour, streaking the glass of room 214 in silver lines. The storm outside mirrored the storm brewing inside. Denise Carter stood at the front of the classroom, her hands clasped loosely, her voice guiding her students through Harper Lee's courtroom scenes. She read with quiet conviction, as though every word still mattered decades after it had been written. The class was restless, shoulders shifting, pencils tapping. But she didn't rush. She believed silence had power. At the back of the room, Tyler Johnson slouched low in his chair, one leg kicked out, his hood shadowing his eyes. He had come to class on time for once, but not out of respect. He came because he wanted to prove something. The scar he'd noticed on Ms. Carter's arm the day before had gnawed at him all night. Who was this woman who didn't scare, didn't shout, didn't break when he pushed? The whispers had already begun, spreading across the classroom like wildfire. She was in the army, someone muttered. Nah, she's too calm for that. Bet she's lying. Why she got that scar then? Denise heard the whispers, though she didn't turn to acknowledge them. Her years in uniform had taught her how to recognize the sound of a room turning, the shift in energy when idle curiosity transformed into testing. Her gut tightened. Something was about to snap. She wrote a line on the board, her chalk leaving a trail of white. The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. Think about that, she said softly. What does it mean to stand for something when no one else will? Her words weren't aimed at Tyler, but they landed on him anyway. The tension cracked when a balled-up piece of paper flew across the room, hitting her shoulder. A small act, but the giggles that followed carried weight. Denise froze for a fraction of a second, then turned her gaze slowly toward the culprit. Her eyes landed on Tyler. Johnson, she said evenly. Do you want to share what's so important with the class? He leaned back, smirking. Just making things less boring, Ms. C. The class laughed nervously. Denise didn't. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him. It was the kind of look that didn't condemn, didn't scold, but held. A soldier's stare. Steady. Unflinching. And Tyler hated it. Because for once, he wasn't in control of the room. He shifted in his chair, restless. Then, before anyone could stop him, he stood up, knocking the desk aside with a screech of metal against tile. His voice cut through the air like glass. You think you're tough, don't you? The class gasped. A few students ducked back, others froze. Denise remained still, though every nerve inside her lit up like a battlefield flare. Tyler moved closer, his jaw clenched, his fists trembling though he masked it with swagger. You walk around like nothing gets to you. Like you're untouchable. You don't know nothing about me. For a moment, Denise said nothing. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. The posture, the readiness, the way her feet subtly shifted for balance. Instinct. And then it happened. Tyler shoved her desk. Hard. The edge of it slammed against her shoulder, the sound of wood and metal colliding echoing through the classroom. Gasps filled the air. But Denise didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. Didn't cry out. She just stood there. Her eyes locked onto his, and in them burned something ancient, something forged in deserts and dust and sleepless nights under fire. Years of battlefields lived behind her gaze, and Tyler felt it like a wall of heat. For the first time in a long time, he was the one who couldn't move. The silence was suffocating. Students' breaths hitched, waiting for an explosion. But Denise's voice, when it came, was low and calm. "You done?" Her tone was not angry. It was steady, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of command, the kind soldiers obey without question. Tyler's bravado cracked, just slightly. His fists loosened. He didn't know why his throat felt tight, why his chest heaved as though he'd sprinted. Denise didn't approach, didn't escalate. She simply held the silence. And in that silence, something inside Tyler shifted. He had wanted to break her, but instead, he was the one unraveling. Have you ever witnessed a moment where silence was more powerful than shouting? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the quietest responses leave the loudest echoes. And if you believe more people need to see stories where strength comes from calm, not chaos, hit subscribe. That way, you'll never miss the next story that challenges what power really looks like. A teacher from next door peeked in, alarmed by the noise. But Denise raised a hand subtly, signaling she had it under control. The other teacher hesitated, then backed away. Denise turned back to Tyler, who now stood inches from her. She spoke quietly, but every word struck like a drumbeat. "I don't scare easy, Tyler. And I'm not your enemy." The words hung in the air. Tyler didn't know what to do with them. No one had ever said that to him, not in that tone, not without judgment. His face flushed, though he masked it with a snarl. "Whatever," he muttered, shoving his chair back and storming toward the door. The room exhaled as it slammed shut behind him. Denise's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the chalk again. Her body remembered too much, too many nights where slamming doors meant danger, too many moments where standing tall was the only option. She forced her hand steady, writing one word on the board: conscience. "Open your books," she said, her voice calm again, though her heart still pounded. The students obeyed quietly, stealing glances at her with a mixture of awe and fear. They had just seen something they didn't understand. And Tyler was already outside, pacing, his chest heaving, his hand shaking. He couldn't explain it, but the way she had looked at him, like she saw him, really saw him, terrified him more than any punishment ever could. For the first time in years, he felt like someone had met his rage with something stronger. Not anger. Not fear. Something else. And he didn't know if he hated her for it, or needed it. The day after the confrontation, the halls of Lincoln High buzzed with rumors. Teenagers thrived on drama, and yesterday's classroom clash had spread like wildfire. Tyler went at Ms. Carter, and she didn't even blink. She just stared him down. He looked scared, man. Tyler looked scared. Tyler hated every whisper. Each time he walked past a group of students, he felt their eyes on him, measuring him differently. Not as the untouchable tough guy, but as the one who had lost control. The one a teacher had bested without even raising her voice. He slammed his locker shut, metal echoing down the corridor. His jaw ached from clenching it. He couldn't afford to let this stick. If he let them think he was weak, he was done. Inside, though, the truth gnawed at him. He couldn't stop replaying her eyes in his head, that steady, unflinching gaze that didn't meet his rage with rage. It unsettled him in ways fists and shouting never did. Denise, meanwhile, sat alone in the teacher's lounge, her coffee untouched. The chatter of colleagues filled the air, complaints about late homework, weekend plans, cafeteria food. But she sat in silence, her fingers wrapped tightly around the paper cup. Her shoulder still throbbed where the desk had slammed into her. It wasn't serious, just a bruise. But the ache was nothing compared to the storm inside her. She had thought she'd left those instincts behind, scanning a room for threats, calculating exits, standing her ground when attacked. But yesterday proved she hadn't. She had seen the fear in some of her students' eyes, the awe in others. And that worried her. She didn't want to be a legend. She wanted to be a teacher. Still, when she thought of Tyler's face, the flash of something raw beneath his defiance, she couldn't shake it. What had driven him to shove her? What had made him lash out so hard? And why did her reaction seem to reach him in ways detention or suspension never could? Tyler didn't show up to English the next morning, nor the morning after. Denise noticed the empty seat, the absence that felt heavier than his presence ever had. She told herself not to care. He was a student. She was his teacher. Boundaries mattered. But still, she cared. On the third day, he finally walked in, his hood pulled low, his eyes avoiding hers. The classroom stilled as he entered, whispers sparking like electricity. Denise said nothing, only nodded toward his seat. Tyler dropped into it with exaggerated force, arms crossed. He didn't open his book, didn't take notes. He sat like a stone, daring her to try to chip away. Denise didn't rise to the bait. She continued teaching, her voice even, her pacing deliberate. But her senses sharpened every time she passed his desk, every time she caught the flicker of his gaze. After class, she asked him to stay. The room emptied quickly, students eager to escape the tension. Tyler leaned back, smirking, though his eyes didn't meet hers. "You want to suspend me or something," he muttered. Denise shook her head. "No." "Then what?" She took a breath. "I want to know why." That word, why, landed heavier than anything else she could have said. Tyler scoffed, shook his head, grabbed his backpack. "You wouldn't get it." "Try me," she said softly. His jaw tightened. He hesitated for just a moment, then left without a word, slamming the door behind him. Why do you think people push hardest against the ones who refuse to push back? Share your thoughts in the comments. You might be surprised how many people see themselves in Tyler, or in Denise. And if this story has already made you stop and think, don't just sit with it. Subscribe. We share stories that hit deep, and if you leave now, you'll miss the moment it all comes together. That night, Tyler lay awake in his bed, the glow of his phone screen casting shadows on the ceiling. He scrolled mindlessly through videos, trying to drown out the echo of her voice. "I want to know why." No one ever asked him why. Teachers lectured him, cops threatened him, even his mom barely looked at him long enough to say goodnight. But why? No one cared enough to ask. It made him angry. It made him restless. And it made him afraid. Denise, too, couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table again, papers untouched, staring at the scar on her arm. The scar Tyler had noticed. The scar that told more story than she ever shared. She whispered a name under her breath, one of many she carried from her military days. A fallen friend. A memory that returned whenever her scars throbbed. She pressed her palm to her arm, grounding herself. For years, she had resisted opening up about her past. It was easier to compartmentalize, to teach by the book and keep her soul tucked away. But Tyler's eyes, angry, lost, searching, reminded her of too many young soldiers who hid their pain behind bravado. Maybe that was why she couldn't look away. The next day, Tyler sat in her class again, arms crossed, face locked in its usual scowl. Denise taught as though nothing had changed, though her heartbeat quickened every time she glanced at him. She didn't push him. She didn't call him out. She simply left the door open, for him to walk through, or not. And Tyler hated that. Because deep down, some part of him wanted to. The following week, the storm outside turned into snow. Lincoln High's heaters rattled against the cold, struggling to keep the classrooms warm. The hallways buzzed with talk of early dismissals and canceled games, but in room 214, the tension between Ms. Carter and Tyler Johnson was far colder than the weather. Denise had stopped trying to draw him out. He sat in the back, hood pulled tight, eyes darting anywhere but her. Still, his presence was a weight she could feel, a bruise that hadn't healed. But life, as it often did, conspired to push them together. That Thursday, Principal Harris appeared at Denise's door just before class. His expression was weary, as if he'd rehearsed the speech. "Ms. Carter, we've got a new peer mentorship program. At-risk students paired with faculty members for weekly sessions. Tyler Johnson's been assigned to you." Denise blinked, caught off guard. "Assigned?" Harris nodded firmly. "You're one of the few he'll tolerate sitting near. And frankly, after last week, we need this to work. For him. For everyone." Her chest tightened. She wanted to protest. She wanted to say she wasn't the right choice, that someone else should take him. But the principal was already moving on, and deep down, she knew why they had chosen her. Because she hadn't flinched. Because she had looked him in the eye and survived it. When she turned back to the class, Tyler was already smirking. He'd heard. Their first session was set for Friday afternoon, in the counseling office. But when Denise arrived, the counselor had been called away, leaving them alone in a cramped room with 2 chairs, a round table, and a clock that ticked far too loudly. Tyler slouched into his chair, arms crossed, his foot tapping in impatient rhythm. "So this is the genius plan? Lock me in a room with you until I behave." Denise sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. "It's not about behavior. It's about time." "Time?" he scoffed. "Lady, I've got better things to do." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" That silenced him for a moment. He looked away, jaw tightening. The minutes dragged. Denise let the silence sit, refusing to fill it with meaningless chatter. Silence, she had learned, could be more revealing than interrogation. Eventually, Tyler broke it. "Why didn't you kick me out?" he muttered. Denise tilted her head. "When?" "That day," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of bravado. "I shoved your desk. Every other teacher would have lost it. You didn't." Denise's eyes softened. "Because anger wasn't what you needed." His gaze snapped up, defensive. "Don't pretend you know what I need." "I'm not pretending," she said gently. "I'm asking." Tyler's jaw worked as though chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Finally, he leaned forward, voice sharp. "You think you're tough. But you don't know what it's like." Denise studied him, her own memories stirring. "You'd be surprised what I know." Their eyes locked, a charged silence stretching between them. Tyler looked away first, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, right." The next week, their sessions continued. Sometimes they sat in silence, the clock ticking like a metronome of stubbornness. Sometimes Tyler baited her with sarcasm, testing her patience. But little by little, cracks appeared. One afternoon, snow piled high outside the windows. Tyler spoke without being prompted. "You know what people say about me?" he asked. Denise met his gaze. "Tell me." "They say I'm just like my dad." His lip curled in disgust. "You know where he is? Prison. That's what I'm supposed to be. That's all I'll ever be." Denise leaned forward slightly, her voice low. "And do you believe that?" His eyes flickered, uncertain. He shrugged, as if the answer weighed too much to carry. "Doesn't matter what I believe. People already decided." Her heart clenched. She had seen soldiers carry that same resignation, the belief that the world had already written their ending. She swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing her voice steady. "You're not your father, Tyler. You get to write your own story." For a fleeting second, something vulnerable crossed his face. But then the walls slammed back up. "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "Do you think someone's past defines who they become, or can people truly rewrite their story?" Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear if you think Tyler can change. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't just watch. Subscribe. Because every week, we tell stories that remind people they're more than their scars. And if you leave, you'll miss the ones that could change you too. One session, Tyler noticed her rubbing her arm absent-mindedly. His eyes narrowed. "That scar. How'd you get it?" Denise froze for a fraction of a second. She had never intended to talk about her military past. But Tyler's question wasn't mocking. It was curious, almost searching. "An accident," she said finally. He snorted. "Doesn't look like no accident." She gave a small, knowing smile. "Maybe someday, I'll tell you the full story. But not today." Something shifted in him at that. He didn't press further, but the fact that she hadn't shut him down entirely planted a seed of trust. Their time together didn't erase the tension. Tyler still rolled his eyes in class, still muttered under his breath, still carried his walls like armor. But outside the classroom, in that cramped office, a fragile thread was forming. Denise found herself both dreading and anticipating their sessions. He drained her patience, yes. But he also reminded her of why she had chosen to teach in the first place, not just to assign essays and grade papers, but to reach students no one else could. And Tyler, though he'd never admit it, began showing up on time. He still sat with his arms crossed, but he came. And in coming, he revealed more than he realized. One snowy evening after their session, Denise left the building to find Tyler lingering by the steps. He wasn't waiting for her, at least, that's what he claimed when she asked. But when she offered him a ride, he hesitated before sliding into the passenger seat of her car. They drove in silence, the heater blowing warm air, the windshield wipers swishing rhythmically. Finally, Tyler spoke. "You don't scare easy." Denise smiled faintly, eyes on the road. "Neither do you." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't know me." She glanced at him briefly. "Maybe not yet. But I'd like to." He didn't respond. But for the first time, he didn't pull away from the possibility. The snow lingered outside Lincoln High, blanketing the town in white. Inside, Denise Carter felt the weight of secrets pressing closer every day. Tyler Johnson had a way of peeling back layers she thought she'd sealed long ago. And though she tried to keep her guard, small pieces slipped through, an expression, a scar, a silence. She knew it was only a matter of time before the boy pushed far enough to uncover the truth. Their mentorship sessions had become routine. Mondays and Thursdays, after school. The counselor stopped attending, leaving the two of them alone with their unspoken tension. Some days were wordless stalemates. Other days, Tyler's sarcasm filled the room. But on rare occasions, something cracked open, raw and unguarded. One Thursday, as the clock ticked past 5, Tyler leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You still haven't told me where that scar came from." Denise sighed. "Why does it matter?" "Because you're not normal," he said bluntly. "No teacher looks at me the way you do. No teacher takes a desk to the shoulder and doesn't even flinch. You've seen stuff. I know it." His words hit harder than he realized. Denise stared at the scar, the faded line that carved across her forearm. Her throat tightened. For years, she had told people the easy lie: a kitchen accident, a fall, a childhood scrape. But Tyler wasn't buying it. He saw through the masks. Finally, she exhaled. "I was in the army." Tyler's eyes widened. "No way." "Yes way," she said softly. "2 tours overseas. I came back with more scars than just this one." For the first time since they'd met, Tyler didn't have a comeback. He sat in stunned silence, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. Later that night, Denise sat at her kitchen table, staring at the folder she hadn't touched in years. Inside were photographs, her squad, her friends, moments captured in the desert heat. And faces she would never see again. She pressed her fingers to one photo, her eyes blurring. Part of her feared she had said too much to Tyler. But another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, honesty was what he needed. At their next session, Tyler came in quieter than usual. He didn't slouch as much, didn't cross his arms so tightly. He seemed to be carrying a question all day, waiting for the right moment to ask. When the silence stretched, Denise finally broke it. "You've got scars too, don't you?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "You look at me like you're trying to figure out if I'll understand," she said gently. "People only do that when they've been through something." For a long moment, Tyler didn't answer. He stared at the table, his jaw clenched. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he muttered, "My dad." Denise leaned forward, her voice steady. "What about him?" Tyler's knuckles whitened against the edge of the table. "He used to hit me. Before he went to prison. Said it was my fault Mom left. Said I was weak. I learned quick, if I wanted to survive, I had to fight first." Denise felt her stomach twist. She reached across the table, but stopped short, letting her hand hover near his. "Tyler, what he did to you was not your fault. None of it." His eyes glistened, but he blinked hard, forcing the tears back. "Doesn't matter. Everyone already decided who I am. A screw-up. Just like him." Her heart ached. She knew that weight. She had carried her own labels once: soldier, killer, broken. And she had nearly believed them. "Tyler," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you're not your father. And you're not the names they give you. You get to choose. Do you believe a person can break free from the shadow of their parents' mistakes? Or does family always shape who we become?" Share your perspective in the comments. Someone reading might need your words more than you know. And if stories like this stir something inside you, don't just watch quietly. Subscribe. We share stories of scars, survival, and second chances every week. And if you walk away now, you might miss the one that helps you heal too. That weekend, Denise found herself thinking about Tyler constantly. His anger, his shame, his pain. It reminded her too much of the young recruits she had trained overseas. Boys barely older than him, carrying trauma far too heavy for their years. Some had survived. Some hadn't. She didn't want Tyler to become another ghost in her memory. At the same time, opening up to him had cracked something in her, too. For years she had avoided talking about her past, burying it beneath lesson plans and late nights of grading. But when she admitted the truth to him, that she was a soldier, it felt like a piece of her was finally seen. Monday came, and Tyler shuffled into their session with an odd look in his eyes. Not defiance. Not sarcasm. Something else. I looked it up, he said. Denise raised an eyebrow. Looked what up? Your unit, he said. The Army. The tours. You're legit. You're not just some teacher with a scar. Denise smiled faintly. And what did that tell you? He shrugged, but his voice was quieter. That maybe you actually get it. More than anyone else. Her chest tightened. She had wanted to be more than just her past. But maybe for Tyler, her past was exactly what he needed. That night, as she drove home through the snowy streets, Denise thought of the strange bond forming between them. Fragile, tentative, built on bruises and truths. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The following week felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but different, like the air had shifted around them. Tyler no longer walked into their mentorship sessions with the same armor. His hood was still up, his arms still crossed, but his eyes didn't avoid hers the way they once had. And Denise, she noticed everything. The way his voice softened when he asked questions. The way he lingered a moment longer at the end of class, as if deciding whether to speak. The way his smirk had lost its edge. They were still strangers in many ways. But something was building between them, an understanding, a fragile thread neither wanted to name. It was a Tuesday when the breakthrough came. Snow fell steadily outside the window, coating the campus in silence. Their session had started like usual, Tyler deflecting with sarcasm, Denise patiently waiting him out. But then he asked, out of nowhere, "Did you ever lose someone? Over there?" Denise's chest tightened. The memories rose instantly, vivid as ever. The blast, the dust, the sound of her best friend's laugh just hours before it was silenced. She looked at Tyler, at the boy who carried his own ghosts, and decided not to hide. "Yes," she whispered. "More than one. People I loved. People I thought I'd spend my whole life knowing." Tyler's brow furrowed. "How do you deal with that?" She swallowed hard. "Some days, I don't. Some days, the memories feel heavier than my body can carry. But other days, I remind myself I survived, and I have to make it mean something." He stared at her, his own defenses slipping. For the first time he looked young, not angry, not dangerous, just young. "I think about my mom like that," he admitted. "She left when I was 9. One night she tucked me in, and the next morning, she was gone. Didn't even leave a note. Just left me with him." Denise felt her heart twist. "That wasn't your fault either, Tyler." He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand, trying to mask the emotion. "You say that like it's easy to believe." "It's not," she said softly. It took me years to believe it wasn't my fault my friends died. That guilt doesn't vanish overnight. But it doesn't get to define you. For the first time, Tyler didn't argue. He just nodded faintly, staring at the floor, as if letting her words sink past the walls he'd built. The next few sessions became less like battles and more like conversations. Denise found herself laughing, actually laughing, when Tyler cracked a dry joke about the school cafeteria's mystery meat. And Tyler caught himself smiling, real smiles, fleeting but genuine, when she teased him about falling asleep in history class. These moments were small, almost ordinary. But in their ordinariness lay something extraordinary: trust. But deep down, he wasn't sure he believed it. And that made the pain worse. The following Monday, Tyler didn't show up for class. Tuesday, he skipped again. By Wednesday, Denise felt her chest tightening every time she saw his empty seat. She wanted to reach out, but a voice inside warned her to stay back. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was crossing lines she had no right to cross. In the teacher's lounge, she overheard two colleagues whispering, "You hear about Carter and Johnson? Word is he's in her office all the time." Denise's face burned. The gossip was twisted, cruel, but she knew how fast it spread. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked to rebuild, could crumble with a single rumor. For the first time since her military days, Denise felt like she was losing the battle. By Thursday, Tyler finally returned. He walked into English late, eyes bloodshot, jaw set. He dropped into his seat without looking at her. Denise's chest ached, but she forced herself to continue teaching, her voice steady even as her hands trembled behind the desk. At the end of class, she gathered her courage. "Tyler, can we talk?" He froze. Then, without turning, he muttered, "No." And he walked out. That night, Denise drove aimlessly through the snow, the wipers beating a rhythm to her spiraling thoughts. She thought of the soldiers she couldn't save, the students she had already lost, the scars that never healed. For the first time in years, the silence felt unbearable. She pulled over, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and whispered, "God, don't let me lose him too." Tyler sat in his bedroom that same night, staring at the notebook where he had once scribbled thoughts he couldn't say out loud. His hand hovered over the pen, but he couldn't bring himself to write. Instead, he tore the pages out, crumpled them, and tossed them to the floor. It felt safer to destroy them than to admit how much they mattered. The bond they had built, the laughter, the trust, the fragile hope, felt shattered beyond repair. For Denise, it was the old wound reopening, the fear that no matter how hard she fought, she would always lose the one she tried to protect. For Tyler, it was proof of what he had always believed, that people leave, that trust is a trap, that he was doomed to be alone. And yet, beneath the pain, beneath the anger, a faint echo lingered. The memory of her voice, steady and sure, telling him he mattered. The memory of his smile, fleeting but real, breaking through her walls. Neither of them knew it yet, but the shatter point was not the end. It was the breaking that had to come before the choice. Snow fell heavy that week, blanketing the streets in silence. For Denise, it was the silence inside that felt heavier, the kind that pressed on her chest until breathing hurt. Every day, she walked into her classroom, scanned the rows, and saw Tyler's face turned away. He came, but he wasn't there. No jokes, no lingering glances, no spark of fight in his eyes. Just a wall. And it cut deeper than she expected. At home, she sat at her kitchen table with the photo album still open, her fingers tracing the faces of soldiers who were gone. She whispered their names like a prayer, her voice breaking. "Tell me," she said into the stillness, "am I failing him the way I failed you?" Her scars ached, phantom pains rising from years ago. She thought of Tyler's words, "You just want to feel like you fixed something." And she couldn't silence the fear that maybe he was right. But beneath the doubt was another truth. When she looked into his eyes, she didn't see a project. She saw a boy begging the world to prove him wrong. And she wanted to be the one who did. Meanwhile, Tyler spent his nights roaming the neighborhood, his hood pulled up against the cold. He couldn't go home, his father was drinking again, and the house reeked of bitterness. So he wandered until his toes went numb, until the quiet streets became a mirror of his thoughts. He hated himself for caring. He hated himself for letting her in. But most of all, he hated the emptiness that came when he shut her out. One night, Tyler found himself at the edge of the park. Snow covered the playground where kids used to laugh. He sat on the swing, chains creaking softly, and pulled the crumpled pages from his pocket. The ones he had ripped from his notebook. His fingers smoothed them out, his eyes scanning the words he had once written. Half-thoughts, broken sentences, things he could never say aloud. "I don't want to be like him. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to be a monster." His throat tightened. He wanted to throw them away again. But this time, he couldn't. Instead, he shoved them back into his pocket and whispered, maybe she was right. The following morning, Denise walked into school early. The halls were empty, the smell of floor polish lingering in the air. She sat at her desk, pulling out her lesson plans, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty seat in the back row. She knew she couldn't keep teaching like this, circling the ache in her chest. She had to decide, step back and protect herself, or step forward and risk being broken again. She thought of the battlefield, of nights when hesitation cost lives. And she knew the truth. Sometimes, survival meant risking everything. That afternoon, she found Tyler sitting outside the counselor's office, his hood up, shoulders hunched. For a moment, she almost walked past. Almost chose silence. But she stopped. "Tyler." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his face hardened. "What?" Her voice shook, but she didn't let it falter. "I'm sorry." His brow furrowed. "For what?" "For walking away," she said. "For letting my fear get louder than my faith in you." He stared at her, caught between disbelief and anger. "You don't get it. You can't fix me." "I'm not here to fix you," she said softly. "I'm here to stand with you, whether you let me or not." The silence stretched, thick with unsaid words. Tyler's fists clenched, his jaw tight. He wanted to push her away, to guard himself. But the memory of her voice lingered, telling him he wasn't his father, telling him he mattered. And for once, he let the silence be enough. That evening, Denise found herself back at her kitchen table. But this time, the silence felt different, less like suffocation, more like waiting. She opened her journal, something she hadn't done in years, and began to write. Not lesson plans. Not reports. Just words. Words about Tyler. Words about scars. Words about hope. And as the ink flowed, she realized she wasn't writing for herself. She was writing for him. Across town, Tyler lay in bed with the crumpled notebook pages spread across his chest. His phone buzzed with texts from kids mocking him, calling him soft, but he ignored them. One afternoon, Denise asked him to help her stack books in the classroom after school. He rolled his eyes, but he stayed. As they worked, she noticed how carefully he handled the worn paperbacks, as though afraid to break them. "You know," she said casually, "you're better at this than you let people think." He smirked. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation." She chuckled. "Maybe it's time you built a new one." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing in thought. "What, like the good kid?" "Like the real kid," she corrected. For a moment, he didn't reply. But when he carried the last stack of books, he did it with less slouch in his shoulders. "Do you think people show their true selves only when they feel safe? Or do you believe who we are around others is who we really are?" Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might change how someone sees their own walls. And if you've listened this far and you feel yourself connecting with Denise and Tyler, don't just move on. Subscribe. These are the kinds of stories we share every week, raw, human, and healing. And if you leave now, you'll miss the moments that matter most. One day, Denise brought in an old photo album. She hadn't planned to. It was tucked in her bag by accident, a remnant of a morning spent rummaging for lesson plans. But when Tyler saw the edge of it sticking out, curiosity sparked. "What's that?" he asked. She hesitated, then placed it on the table. "Memories." He flipped it open before she could stop him. The first photo showed her and her squad, sand-colored uniforms blending into the desert. Young faces. Tired faces. Some faces gone now. "That's you?" he asked, pointing. She nodded. "That's me. That's who I was before this classroom." He studied the picture, his expression unreadable. "You look different." "How so?" "Like you knew exactly who you were." Denise felt the sting of truth in his words. "I thought I did. But war changes you. Coming home changes you too." Tyler closed the album slowly. "Guess we're both trying to figure out who we are now." She smiled faintly. "Guess so." Later that evening, Denise found herself reflecting on the day as she sat in her quiet kitchen. For years, she had eaten dinner alone, her life stripped down to silence and routine. But now, she caught herself wishing she had someone to share it with. And strangely, when she thought of that someone, she thought of Tyler, not as a son, not as a soldier, but as a boy who had cracked her hardened exterior with his stubborn humanity. Tyler, too, felt the change. At home, his nights were still restless, his father's shadow still looming in every corner of his mind. But when he thought of Ms. Carter, he felt something else. A steadiness. A sense that maybe he wasn't doomed to repeat the cycle. He even caught himself writing again, in the margins of his notebook, half-formed thoughts he would never dare to say out loud. Thoughts about scars, about survival, about how maybe being seen wasn't as terrifying as he thought. Their bond was still fragile, still laced with tension. But for the first time, both Denise and Tyler allowed themselves to imagine a different future, one not dictated by scars or shadows, but by connection. They didn't say it out loud. They didn't have to. It was in the way he stayed after class a little longer. It was in the way she asked how his day was and really listened. It was in the quiet, in the space between words, where healing often began. The fragile peace between Denise Carter and Tyler Johnson lasted less than 2 weeks before it cracked wide open. It began with a rumor. Rumors had always been the fuel of high school hallways, and this one spread like smoke through dry brush. Tyler Johnson was softening. Spending too much time with Ms. Carter. Turning into a teacher's pet. By Friday, The whispers reached Tyler himself. "You falling for your English teacher or something?" One boy sneered as Tyler passed in the cafeteria. "What happened to the big bad tough guy?" Tyler shoved his tray down so hard milk spilled across the table. His fists clenched, his chest heaving. Laughter echoed around him, the sound sharp and cutting. He stormed out before the fight could start, but the damage was done. That afternoon, their mentorship session began with silence, colder than usual. Tyler slumped in his chair, hood up, face hard as stone. Denise sensed the shift instantly. "You're quiet today," she said gently. "Don't start," he snapped. Her brow furrowed. "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking if you're okay." He let out a bitter laugh. "Why do you care? What, you think saving me makes you some kind of hero?" The words hit like a slap. Denise leaned back, stunned. "That's not what this is. Isn't it?" His eyes burned with defiance. "You tell me your war stories, I spill my messed up family drama, and suddenly we're buddies? You don't know me. You'll never know me." Her throat tightened. "Tyler, I'm not trying to play hero. I'm trying to be here. Because you matter." "Stop saying that," he exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "I don't matter. I'm just a screw-up waiting to end up in prison like my dad, and the only reason you care is because you need to feel like you fixed something." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Denise's heart pounded. He had cut straight into her deepest fear, the fear that maybe she was using him to patch her own wounds, to redeem her failures from the past. She stood slowly, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "If that's really what you think, then maybe we should stop these sessions." His jaw tightened, but for a flicker of a second, pain crossed his face. Still, he turned away. "Fine by me." He walked out, the door slamming behind him. That night, Denise sat alone at her kitchen table, the same spot where she had fought countless sleepless battles. But this one cut deeper than any memory of war. She stared at the photo album still lying open from last week, her friends' faces smiling up at her. "I'm trying," she whispered to them. "I'm trying not to fail him, too." But the echo of Tyler's words rang louder than her own. "You just want to feel like you fixed something." And what if he was right? Tyler, meanwhile, wandered the streets long after dark. His fists were raw from punching brick walls, his throat hoarse from yelling into the night. Anger, shame, betrayal, they tangled inside him like barbed wire. He had started to believe her. He had started to think maybe, just maybe, someone saw him. And now he hated himself for it. When he got home, the apartment was dark. His father wasn't there, probably at the bar again. Tyler collapsed onto his bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in months, tears slipped down his face unchecked. "She doesn't care," he muttered to himself. "Nobody cares." Instead, he stared at the words he had once tried to destroy, and for the first time, he didn't feel ashamed of them. He thought of Ms. Carter's scar, of the way she had whispered that survival had to mean something. And he wondered if maybe his survival could mean something too. The next day, he showed up early for their session. Denise was already there, her papers neatly stacked, her face composed. When he entered, she looked up, her heart leaping with relief she tried not to show. He dropped into the chair, pulling his hood back slowly. I didn't mean what I said." Her eyes softened. "I know." He looked at her, his voice unsteady. I don't know how to let people care." Denise's throat tightened. You don't have to know right away. You just have to let it happen, one moment at a time. For the first time in weeks, he didn't argue. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible nod, but it was enough. Have you ever pushed someone away, only to realize later they were the very person you needed most? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. For Denise and Tyler, the choice had been made. Quietly. Tentatively. Without fanfare. They weren't healed yet. They weren't whole. But they were still here, sitting in the same room, choosing not to walk away. And sometimes, that was the bravest choice of all. The storm broke on a Wednesday. It had been 3 weeks since Denise and Tyler's fragile truce in Act 8. Their sessions had grown steadier, more grounded, though still lined with hesitation. Denise noticed the change in him, fewer absences, less anger. Tyler still wore his hood half the time, but his eyes weren't as hollow. He even began turning in assignments, messy, unfinished, but his. But healing rarely comes without one final test. That morning, English class was quiet. Denise had just started a lesson on Of Mice and Men when a commotion erupted in the back. A senior, big, cocky, the kind of boy who thrived on cruelty, snatched Tyler's notebook. "Hey, what's this?" the boy jeered, holding it up. "Poems? Little love notes? Ah, Johnson's a softie." Laughter rippled across the room. Tyler froze, his face paling. "Give it back," he muttered, his voice low but dangerous. The boy smirked, flipping a page. "Listen to this. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to be a monster." He cackled, shoving the notebook higher. Tyler lunged. Desks screeched across the floor, shouts filled the air. Fists swung, chaos. Denise's instincts surged. For a heartbeat, she was back in the desert, sirens blaring, dust choking the air. Her chest pounded with the same fear she'd felt years ago, fear of losing someone. But this time, she didn't freeze. "Enough!" her voice thundered, sharper than gunfire. The room fell silent. Even the bully blinked, startled. Denise strode across the classroom, her presence commanding, her scar glinting beneath the fluorescent light. She held out her hand. "Notebook. Now." The boy hesitated, then shoved it into her palm. Denise turned, her gaze landing on Tyler, chest heaving, fists clenched, eyes burning with humiliation. The entire class watched, waiting for her next move. And then, in a voice steady but full of weight, she said, "You will not shame someone for surviving." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. She placed the notebook on Tyler's desk, her hand lingering there. "Your words matter," she said quietly, "just for him. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." Something broke in him then, not in anger, but in release. His fists loosened. His shoulders sagged. For the first time, he didn't hide. He let the tears spill, raw and unguarded, in front of everyone. And instead of mocking him, the room stayed silent. Because Denise Carter's authority, her fire, left no space for cruelty. Later, when the class ended and the hallway emptied, Tyler stayed behind. He picked up his notebook with trembling hands. "I thought you'd be mad," he muttered. Denise shook her head. "I was scared. But not of you." He looked at her, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you just give up? Everyone else does." Her throat tightened. "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind. And I refuse to do that to you." For a long moment, he stared at her. And then with a shaky breath he whispered, "Thank you." 2 words. But they carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. The following week, the school buzzed with gossip about the incident. Some mocked, some whispered, but Tyler walked the halls differently. His shoulders weren't hunched. His steps weren't as heavy. He even began sitting closer to the front in English, his notebook open, pen in hand. Denise noticed, and smiled. One afternoon, he approached her desk after class. I wrote something," he said, sliding a folded page toward her. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was messy, the words uneven, but the message was clear. "I thought I was broken. I thought I was just like him. But maybe I can be more." Denise's eyes blurred. She looked up, her voice hushed. "Tyler, this is beautiful." He shrugged, trying to mask his vulnerability. "It's just words." "No," she said firmly. "It's courage." And for the first time, he smiled without hiding it. That evening, Denise walked home through the snow, the paper folded carefully in her coat pocket. For years, she had carried only memories of loss. Now she carried something else, proof that broken things could be mended. At her kitchen table, she placed Tyler's note beside the photo album of her fallen friends. "And for the first time in a long time," she whispered, "we didn't lose. Not completely." Her tears fell, not from grief, but from healing. Tyler, at home, sat on his bed with the notebook open. He wrote again, but not about monsters this time. He wrote about survival. About scars. About a teacher with a past she never let define her. And as he wrote, he realized something. Maybe he didn't have to be afraid of tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow could hold something better. Do you believe people can truly change when someone refuses to give up on them? Or do you think some wounds never heal? Share your truth in the comments. Your words might be the lifeline someone else is waiting for. Weeks later, spring crept into the city. Snow melted, sunlight stretched longer across the classrooms. Tyler passed English with the highest grade he had ever earned. Denise celebrated quietly, not as a teacher marking success, but as a soldier who had won a different kind of battle. On the last day of the semester, as students filed out, Tyler lingered at her desk. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "See you next year, Ms. Carter." And Denise smiled, her heart full. Because victory didn't always look like medals or parades. Sometimes, it looked like a scarred woman and a broken boy refusing to give up on each other. Sometimes, it looked like love, unexpected, redemptive, fierce.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.